Get her out of here! Victoria Hale's voice cracked like glass across the polished boardroom. The CEO didn't even look at Elena Torres as she spoke, just flicked her manicured hand toward the door. Laughter rippled from a few of the executives, the sound bouncing off the mahogany walls and catching in Elena's chest like a thorn. She tightened her grip on the mop handle, her knuckles whitening, her breath steady. For a moment, Elena almost obeyed. But then her eyes landed on the glowing screen at the head of the table. Filled with numbers and projections, she understood better than half the room. Her voice slipped out, quiet, but razor-sharp. "Those numbers don't add up," she said. Silence cracked the laughter. Heads turned. The janitor had just spoken where she wasn't supposed to. If you're watching this and know what it feels like to be dismissed, you'll want to hear the rest of this story. Subscribe now, because this is where everything begins to flip. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Her tone carried the weight of money and control, the certainty that no one dared question her. But Elena didn't flinch. She was used to storms. She'd walked through worse. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "I'm sorry. I'll leave." She let the words fall easily, knowing that what she had seen on that spreadsheet would not leave her mind. The hallway outside was cold, humming with fluorescent lights. Elena's shoes squeaked against the marble as she pushed her mop bucket forward. She didn't belong here. At least, that's what they wanted her to believe. But inside her pocket, folded carefully, was the inhaler her daughter Sophia needed. Rent was due, bills were stacked, and every bruise of humiliation was one she had promised herself she'd endure if it meant keeping her little girl safe. Her life wasn't about pride anymore. It was survival, and survival had taught her patience. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know the years she had spent in offices like theirs. Her signature inked on deals larger than this one. Her name whispered in negotiations across oceans. They saw only a uniform and a mop. That was fine. For now. She reached the elevator and paused. Behind her, the boardroom doors burst open, voices raised. Something was wrong. Elena caught fragments. Contract collapsing. They're pulling out. Her heart raced. She didn't need the details to know. The billion-dollar deal was unraveling before their eyes. She exhaled slowly. It wasn't her problem. It couldn't be. She had a child to think about, a night shift to finish. And yet, something burned in her chest, something that had never gone away. The instinct to step into the fire when everyone else was frozen. The same instinct that had once made her the youngest negotiator in her firm before everything fell apart. Where are you watching from? Maybe you've sat in rooms where no one saw you, where your voice was nothing more than background noise. Let me tell you, this is the wrong woman for Victoria Hale to underestimate. Elena Torres had been erased once. It wasn't going to happen again. The elevator doors stayed closed, a gleaming wall of brushed steel in front of Elena. She could still hear the voices spilling down the hallway, sharp, anxious. Nothing like the smug laughter that had followed her out minutes earlier. The change in tone was unmistakable. Panic. She gripped the mop handle tighter, her instincts fighting the urge to walk away. Her shoulders sagged. Walking away would be easy. Push the bucket into the service lift, disappear into the rhythm of sweeping floors and emptying trash bins. That's what Victoria Hale expected of her. That's all anyone in this building thought she was capable of. But the words from inside the boardroom clawed at her, fragments she couldn't ignore. Withdrawal, breach of terms, lawsuit risk. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She had signed contracts like that once. She had watched them teeter on the edge of collapse and had pulled them back with nothing more than a single correction, a careful phrase, a truth tucked into the right sentence. The mop in her hand suddenly felt like both a shield and a disguise. The hallway light flickered. She thought of Sophia, her daughter curled up at home with her favorite blanket, breathing steady only because of the inhaler Elena kept close. This job wasn't about her. It was about survival, bills, safety. And yet survival had a cruel way of demanding more. Because dignity mattered too, and being invisible every day scraped her raw. Behind the boardroom doors, a man's voice cracked, louder than the others. "They're pulling the plug. We'll lose everything." Chairs scraped. A bottle rolled across the floor. Elena exhaled sharply. She couldn't stop herself. The part of her that had once been trained to walk into rooms like that demanded to move. She turned the mop handle sideways, leaning it against the wall. For a moment, she just stood there, palms flat against the cold steel of the elevator doors. She had promised herself she would never reveal her past here. No one could know about the contracts she had once secured, the negotiations that had carried her name. That life had ended when her husband walked out, when the bills mounted, when one hospital visit turned into 10. She had rebuilt herself into someone no one would notice. But now they needed her, and they didn't even know it. The boardroom door cracked open. Daniel Cho stepped into the hallway, his expression tight, his phone pressed to his ear. He glanced at Elena, clearly not recognizing her as anything more than the cleaning staff. He turned his back, whispering urgently into the phone. "They won't budge." "Yes, I know the penalty clause." "No, we can't counter in time." His voice trailed off as he disappeared toward the stairwell. Elena swallowed. Her heart thudded against her ribs, louder than the voices. She bent down, wrung out her mop into the bucket, the water splashing dark against the pale tile. She told herself to focus on her work, to stay invisible. But her body wouldn't obey. She found herself drifting closer to the boardroom door, listening as the chaos inside swelled. Victoria's voice was sharp, brittle now. "I don't care what they said. Throw them another offer." "We can't lose this," someone else replied, desperate. "They're already logging off the call. If we don't clarify that clause, it's over." Clause. The word hit Elena like a spark. She knew exactly what they were talking about. Her mind raced back to the screen she had glimpsed moments earlier, the misaligned numbers, the flawed assumption buried in the middle of the spreadsheet. It wasn't just sloppy math. It was the wrong definition of deliverables. And if the investors overseas had caught it, they would see it as a breach of trust. Her pulse quickened. She shouldn't know this. She wasn't supposed to be in their world anymore. But she couldn't unsee it. The elevator chimed behind her. She didn't move. Her hand hovered near the door handle of the boardroom instead. This was the line, the thin barrier between the woman she was forced to be and the woman she had once been. Crossing it could cost her everything. But not crossing it might cost her something worse, the last shred of self-respect she had left. Her throat tightened. She thought of Sophia's soft voice that morning. "Mom, when will people stop looking through us?" Elena had smiled then, hiding the sting. But the words followed her now, pressing against her ribs. The voices inside rose to a frantic pitch. "Shut it down! We can't let them see the error." "Too late! They already know!" Elena's hand touched the door. The wood was warm under her palm, polished smooth by money and power. She breathed in deeply, the smell of coffee, perfume, and tension leaking through the crack. She didn't need to be asked. She didn't need permission. For the first time in years, Elena Torres felt the old fire stir in her chest. She wasn't just a janitor. Not really. And though no one else knew it yet, this was her battlefield. Elena pushed the boardroom door open just enough to slip inside. The air hit her like a wall, thick with cologne, stale coffee, and panic. Screens along the walls glowed with frozen faces of international investors on a video call, their expressions stiff and unimpressed. The executives in the room were scrambling, their voices tripping over one another, while Victoria Hale stood at the head of the table, her jaw tight and her arms crossed like a queen losing her crown. No one noticed Elena at first. She moved quietly, like she always did, pressing her back against the wall as though she was still invisible. But her eyes swept the screen on the table again. There it was, the clause, buried in the projection. She could see the mistake as clearly as a red stain on white carpet. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about trust. The wrong wording turned a promise into a liability. Daniel Cho was the first to spot her. His voice stumbled mid-sentence. "Why is the janitor back in here?" A few heads turned, irritation sparking. Victoria's gaze snapped over. Her lip curled. Out! Now the command cut through the room. Elena froze, her body stiff. Every instinct screamed at her to obey, to vanish into the safety of anonymity. But another voice inside her, quiet, steady, kept her in place. She cleared her throat. "You're losing the deal because of Section 14. The definition doesn't align with their original terms." Her voice was even, almost too calm for the chaos around her. The room fell silent. For one sharp second, no one breathed. Then laughter erupted at the far end of the table. One of the executives leaned back, shaking his head. "What? Are we taking contract advice from housekeeping now?" Heat flared across Elena's cheeks, but she didn't move. Her gaze locked on the screen, where one of the investors' brows had lifted at her words. They were still listening. Victoria's heels clicked as she stepped closer. "This is not your place. Get out." Each word was sharp enough to draw blood, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. She knew something was slipping beyond her control. Elena steadied herself, the fire in her chest burning brighter. "It's not a guess," she said quietly. "The clause changes the scope. They think you're trying to shift accountability. That's why they're pulling back." Murmurs broke out around the table. Daniel's eyes flicked from Elena to the screen, then back again. His phone buzzed in his hand, ignored. He leaned forward slightly, voice cautious. "What exactly do you mean?" Victoria's glare could have cut steel. "Don't encourage her," she snapped, but her voice cracked. Elena took a breath, the weight of years pressing against her ribs. "I mean, the language is wrong. It turns deliverables into an open-ended obligation. They'll never sign until it's fixed. They think you're either incompetent or lying." Her words were blunt, but not cruel, just precise. The way she had once been trained to speak when the stakes were life-changing. The investors on the screen exchanged glances. One leaned forward, his accent thick, but his meaning clear. Finally, someone who understands. "That is correct." The room froze. Victoria's face drained of color. Daniel's brows shot up, his grip tightening on the table's edge. For the first time since she had entered, Elena felt the shift. The balance of power tilted. Not completely, not yet, but enough. Her heart thundered, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of practice hiding storms behind calm eyes paid off now. She wasn't the executive she used to be. Not in this room, not in these clothes. But her mind hadn't forgotten. Victoria recovered quickly, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You're a janitor. You don't know what you're talking about. Security. No." The word came from Daniel, quiet but firm. He held up a hand. "She's right. If that clause stands, they'll walk. We've all seen it." A hush fell again. Elena stood still, her palms damp. her body buzzing with adrenaline. She hadn't meant to expose herself this much. Not yet. But the truth had slipped free, and the room couldn't stuff it back down. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the faint static of the investors' microphones. Elena let the silence stretch. She knew silence could be louder than shouting, sharper than any insult. Finally, one of the investors on screen spoke again, nodding toward her. "Correct the clause. Then we can continue." His image flickered as the call steadied. Victoria's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. She looked like she had swallowed glass, but she forced a smile, brittle and thin. "Fine. We'll review it immediately." Elena's chest tightened. She had done it. Not fully, not finally, but enough to prove she wasn't invisible. Enough to remind herself of the woman she used to be. As she stepped back toward the wall, the mop leaning silently in the corner, her heart ached with both relief and dread. She had revealed too much. And Victoria Hale was not the kind of woman to forgive humiliation. Elena stayed pressed against the boardroom wall, her breathing shallow. Victoria's brittle smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes burned with fury. Around the table, executives shifted uneasily, some glancing at Elena with thinly veiled disbelief, others with a flicker of something else, reluctant respect. The mop in the corner seemed to mock the entire scene, a symbol of who they thought she was versus what she had just proven. Daniel Cho leaned forward, breaking the silence. "We need to hear more," he said carefully, his tone measured, but his gaze steady on Elena. She clearly understands what's happening. His words hung in the air, bold enough to risk Victoria's wrath. Victoria snapped her head toward him. "Don't be absurd. She's staff. She doesn't belong in this room." The veneer of control was cracking. Her words more venom than poise now. "Do you want investors thinking we can't manage our own deals without janitors?" The insult hit Elena like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She let her eyes settle on Daniel instead, calm, steady. "The clause isn't the only problem," she said softly. "The financial forecast is based on outdated import tariffs. If they catch that, it won't just be mistrust, it'll be collapse." Gasps echoed around the table. One of the younger executives fumbled with his laptop, scrolling furiously, his face drained of color. "She's right. The tariffs changed last quarter. We didn't." He cut himself off, avoiding Victoria's glare. The investors on the screen spoke again, their English halting but precise. "Yes, that is correct. We noticed. You adjust, or we end call." The ultimatum was clear. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The weight of the deal, millions, maybe billions, pressed into the room like a storm cloud, and all of it balanced on the words of the woman they had just tried to push out. Victoria's jaw tightened so hard, it looked painful. "Fine!" she hissed through clenched teeth. "We'll make the revisions." She turned sharply to Elena. "You leave." Now Elena's stomach twisted. Every instinct told her to obey, to retreat before she invited consequences she couldn't handle. But she also knew the danger wasn't over. Fixing the documents was only the surface. Trust was the real battle, and once broken, it rarely returned. Her hands trembled, but she clasped them in front of her to hide it. "If you revise without addressing them directly, they'll still walk," she said, voice steady. "You have to acknowledge the error. Own it. That's the only way to salvage credibility." The words sliced through the room. Executives shifted, some nodding faintly, others looking like they wished she would disappear. Daniel's lips parted, as though he wanted to speak, but Victoria cut across him. "That's enough." Her voice was sharp, cold. She gestured toward the door with a flick of her hand, as though Elena were a stain to be wiped away. But before Elena could move, The lead investor's voice filled the silence. She is correct again. We wait for your acknowledgement. The call timer ticked on the screen, each passing second another threat to the deal's survival. Victoria's face was a mask, rage simmering beneath. She forced her lips into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, she said, her tone brittle. She turned toward the investors, her voice softening, pretending humility. We recognize the oversight and will correct it immediately. Our commitment remains unchanged. The investors leaned back, still skeptical, but no longer reaching to end the call. A thin thread of the deal remained. Elena let her shoulders ease slightly. She had held her ground, and the tide had shifted. But as Victoria turned back to her, the promise in her eyes was unmistakable. Retribution would come. The room began to stir again. Papers shuffled. Keyboards clicked. Daniel glanced toward Elena, a hint of curiosity softening his usually composed expression. It wasn't gratitude, not yet. But it was something, a crack in the wall between their worlds. Elena bent to pick up her mop, the handle cool and familiar in her hands. She told herself it was enough to have steadied the ship, even if no one said thank you. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't finished. She had revealed too much of herself, too soon. As she wheeled her bucket toward the door, Victoria's voice chased her like a knife. "You'll regret this," she whispered, low enough that only Elena could hear. The words slid like ice down her spine. Elena didn't answer. She pushed the bucket forward, the wheels squeaking against marble. But her thoughts were already racing. She hadn't just stepped back into her old world for a moment. She had torn the curtain down. And now, there was no going back. Elena kept her pace steady as she wheeled the bucket down the corridor, the CEO's words still clinging to her ears like poison. "You'll regret this." The threat was quieter than the shuffle of her shoes, but it rang louder than anything else in her mind. She'd exposed herself in that boardroom. She had drawn too much attention, cracked the facade she had worked so hard to keep. She reached the service hallway, a quieter stretch lit by humming fluorescent bulbs. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to shake the sting of humiliation, but her fingers trembled on the mop handle. Sophia's face floated before her eyes, the soft, tired eyes of a child who trusted her mother to endure anything for her sake. That was why Elena had swallowed pride for so long. That was why she had taken this job instead of returning to the high-stakes life that once consumed her. Yet survival had turned into something else. Dignity. The boardroom had reminded her of the person she used to be. The woman who could dissect contracts and negotiations in minutes. That woman wasn't dead. She had just been buried beneath bills and grief. A soft footstep behind her made Elena turn. Daniel Cho was there, his expression unreadable. He looked out of place in the bare hallway, his tailored suit stark against the peeling paint and cleaning carts. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he studied her, as though searching for a missing piece. "You saw that clause before anyone else did," he said finally, his voice low. "And you were right." Twice, his gaze lingered, probing. "That's not luck." Elena tightened her grip on the mop. "I should get back to work." Daniel didn't move. "What's your background?" The question wasn't casual. It carried weight, suspicion, maybe even respect. No janitor spots tariff errors at a glance. Her pulse jumped. She kept her tone flat. "Background doesn't matter. I clean floors now." He frowned, not satisfied. "It matters if you can save this deal. Investors won't give us another chance." The words pressed against her carefully built walls. For years, she had hidden behind silence, letting people see only what they wanted to see. But now, Daniel was poking at the truth. and she wasn't ready to let it out. "Let me work," she said quietly, and pushed the bucket forward. The squeak of wheels filled the silence between them. Daniel didn't stop her this time, but she felt his eyes on her back until she turned the corner. Inside, her thoughts churned. She couldn't afford exposure. The more they knew, the more dangerous it became. Victoria Hale already hated her. If the CEO discovered Elena's past, she wouldn't just fire her. She'd destroy her. And yet, a part of Elena couldn't deny the flicker of vindication that Daniel's words sparked. Someone had noticed. Someone had recognized competence, even if only for a moment. That recognition stirred something restless inside her. By the time she reached the supply closet, her hands had steadied. She pulled out a fresh rag, the smell of bleach sharp in the air. The familiar motions calmed her, grounding her in the life she had chosen, humble, safe, invisible. But she couldn't stop the images of the boardroom flashing through her mind, faces turning toward her, investors nodding at her words, power trembling in the hands of people who thought she was nothing. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the boardrooms she used to command, the weight of contracts worth billions balanced on her shoulders, the thrill of solving impossible knots with nothing more than precision and poise. It had been a lifetime ago, before her husband left, before hospitals drained every account, before she'd learned how fragile success really was. A phone buzzed down the hall, breaking her reverie. She peeked out and saw Daniel again, this time speaking sharply into his phone. "We'll lose them unless someone clarifies the delivery clause directly," he said. His eyes flicked up and met hers briefly, then shifted away. Elena stepped back, closing the closet door. Her heart pounded. She knew exactly how to phrase it, how to salvage the threadbare trust. But she also knew what it would cost her. If she stepped forward again, there would be no hiding afterward. The memory of Victoria's glare burned. "You'll regret this." The woman had power, resources, and a ruthless streak. Elena wasn't naive. If she made herself a threat, Victoria would crush her. Still, as she leaned against the closet wall, the words her daughter had spoken that morning returned to her. "When will people stop looking through us?" Elena's throat tightened. Maybe it wasn't enough to survive quietly. Maybe her daughter needed to see her mother stand tall again, no matter the risk. She exhaled slowly. She couldn't make the choice yet. Not fully, but something had shifted. The mop in her hands no longer felt like just a tool of survival. It felt like a disguise she was wearing until the right moment came to take it off. "Subscribe now," her voice whispered only in her thoughts, echoing the same urgency that the story itself carried. Because this is just the beginning. Elena lingered in the supply closet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above her. The rag in her hand was damp, bleach stinging her fingertips. But her mind was still in the boardroom. She couldn't shake the sound of Daniel's voice, measured, searching, as if he'd seen through the layers she had worked so hard to build. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't laughing at her. He was watching. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the shelf. One mistake, she thought. Just one slip, and everything could come crashing down. Victoria Hale had already marked her as an enemy, and Elena knew how dangerous that was. The CEO didn't just control contracts and numbers, she controlled people. Her threats were never idle. Still, the part of Elena that refused to die whispered louder. "You were right." They listened, and they'll need you again. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, pulling her back to reality. She slipped it out, the cracked screen lighting up with a text. "Mom, don't forget my inhaler is in your bag. Love you." Sophia's message was simple, sweet, grounding. Elena's chest ached with both pride and fear. She couldn't afford to let Victoria's threats scare her into silence. Not when her daughter looked to her as a shield against the world. She tucked the phone away, just as the closet door creaked open. Daniel stood there, one hand braced on the frame, his expression caught between urgency and curiosity. "There you are," he said, his voice low. "The investors are circling. They're demanding clarifications. And honestly, I don't think Hale can give them what they need." Elena straightened slowly, rag clenched in her hand like armor. "That's not my problem," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Daniel studied her, his gaze sharp. "It could be," he replied. "You've already proven you see things others miss. You knew about the tariffs, the clause. That's not coincidence. Who are you, really?" The question cut deep. Her heart pounded. For years she had hidden behind uniforms and quiet corners, letting the world believe she was no one. But Daniel was peeling back the disguise piece by piece. She needed to divert him before he uncovered too much. "I told you," she said firmly. "I clean floors." Daniel tilted his head, unconvinced. "You don't just clean floors. People like Hale don't hate someone unless they feel threatened. She's terrified of you." His words were soft, but they struck like blows. Elena froze. Terrified? Victoria Hale didn't fear anyone. But the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. Elena had walked into her kingdom and pointed out a flaw the queen had missed. That wasn't something Victoria could forgive or forget. "Stay out of this," Elena said quietly. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she was holding back. "It's not safe for either of us." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly, as if recognizing the wall she had built. But before he could reply, a voice thundered from down the hall. "Torres!" Elena stiffened. Victoria Hale stood at the far end of the corridor, heels clicking against the marble as she advanced. Her presence filled the hallway like a storm cloud. Daniel straightened immediately, his professional mask sliding back into place. Victoria stopped a few feet away, her smile razor sharp. "How convenient," she said coolly. "The hero of the hour, hiding in a closet." Her eyes swept over Elena with open disdain. "Don't mistake one lucky guess for relevance. You've had your moment. Don't overstep again." Elena said nothing. She forced her hands to stay still at her sides, though her pulse raced. Victoria's gaze flicked to Daniel. "And you," she said sharply. "Stop indulging her. We have a deal to save." She turned back to Elena, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Stay in your lane, or I'll make sure you don't have a lane at all." The threat was clear, ruthless. Elena felt the weight of it, but she refused to show fear. Instead, she met Victoria's gaze with quiet defiance. No words, no reaction, just the silence of someone who had survived worse storms. Victoria scoffed, the sound sharp as broken glass, and turned on her heel. The echo of her footsteps lingered long after she was gone. Daniel exhaled, his composure cracking for the first time. "She's afraid you'll upstage her," he murmured, "and that means she'll come after you." Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. She leaned back against the wall, rag still damp in her hand, mop bucket waiting beside her like a reminder of the disguise she couldn't drop. Not yet. But deep down, something had shifted again. For years, she had believed invisibility was her shield. Now she realized it was also her prison. If Victoria Hale wanted to bury her, she would have to stand up first. Elena stood motionless in the corridor, long after Victoria's footsteps faded. The rag in her hand had gone cold, the bleach drying into her skin. Her silence had been defiance, but inside she could feel the tremors of fear. Victoria Hale's threats weren't empty. Elena had seen that look before, on people who destroyed reputations and lives without hesitation. But fear wasn't the only thing thrumming in her chest. Beneath it, stronger, was the quiet throb of anger. Not the kind that made her reckless, but the kind that built slowly, layer after layer, until it became impossible to ignore. For years, she had accepted invisibility as a shield. Tonight had proved it was also a weapon, because no one expected her to step forward until it was too late. Daniel lingered nearby, his brow furrowed. He looked as though he wanted to speak, but Elena turned away, pushing her mop bucket forward. "Don't," she said quietly. "Whatever you're about to ask, don't." He followed anyway, his voice steady. "You saved the deal once. You could do it again. Why keep hiding when you clearly—" She cut him off, her voice sharp but not loud. "Because hiding is the only thing keeping my daughter safe." Her eyes flicked toward him, daring him to push further. Daniel blinked, taken aback, the words silencing him in a way her calmness in the boardroom hadn't. They walked in silence until Elena turned into the dim service corridor near the loading docks. She parked the mop bucket and leaned against the wall, her chest heavy with unshed words. She hadn't meant to mention Sophia, but the truth had slipped out. It was always her daughter, her reason for swallowing pride, her reason for pushing through nights that broke her back. Daniel spoke again, softer now. "You have someone depending on you. That makes sense, but it also means you can't let Hale run over you. If she destroys this deal, it's not just her reputation on the line. It's jobs, pensions, livelihoods, and maybe even your own." Elena closed her eyes, letting the truth of that settle. She hated that he was right. Staying invisible wouldn't protect her forever. Not if Victoria decided to make an example out of her. The sound of hurried footsteps pulled both of them back to attention. A young assistant burst through the corridor door, his face pale. "They need clarification again," he panted. "Investors are threatening to walk for good. She's spiraling." His eyes darted between Daniel and Elena, as though embarrassed to even glance at her. Daniel straightened. "I'll be there in a minute." He turned back to Elena, voice urgent. "This is it. If you don't step in, the deal dies. Hale will bury the blame under layers of excuses, but people will remember the janitor who almost saved them." His gaze locked on hers. "Or the one who stayed silent." The words sliced through her hesitation. She remembered Sophia again, her daughter, asking when people would stop looking through them. Elena's hands curled into fists. She could keep hiding, but what would that teach her child? That survival meant silence? That dignity had to be traded away forever? Number. That wasn't the lesson she wanted to leave behind. She opened her eyes, meeting Daniel's stare. "If I do this," she whispered, "you keep my name out of it. No headlines, no files, no trails, nothing that leads back to my daughter." Daniel nodded once. Solemn. "You have my word." The decision crystallized in her chest like steel. She pushed off the wall and straightened her shoulders, the rag slipping from her fingers to the floor. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was shrinking into corners. She felt taller, steadier, like the woman she used to be. The assistant still hovered nervously, glancing between them. Elena turned to him, her voice calm. "Bring me the full contract file. Every revision, every clause, and a clean copy of the tariff report." The boy's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. Do it," Daniel cut in sharply. "Now." The assistant scurried off, leaving them alone again. Elena exhaled slowly, her pulse steadying. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was preparing. The disguise of invisibility had bought her time. But the truth was clawing its way out. Daniel watched her, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Respect, maybe even trust. "You've done this before?" he said quietly. Not as a question, but as certainty. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. When the assistant returned minutes later with a stack of papers, Elena took them without hesitation. She settled onto an overturned crate, the documents spread across her lap, her pen moving swiftly. Numbers, terms, and loopholes danced before her eyes, familiar as an old language she hadn't spoken in years. The mop bucket sat forgotten beside her, its water still and murky. For the first time, Elena felt the weight of the disguise lifting. She was stepping back into the arena she had once commanded, not for pride, but for survival, and for the daughter who needed to see her mother fight. Elena's pen scratched across the contract pages, the ink bleeding into every margin where she spotted danger. The loading dock's hum became background noise. Her focus narrowed to clauses, tariffs, and hidden traps. She hadn't done this in years, but her mind slipped back into the rhythm like an old song she thought she'd forgotten. Every misstep the executives had missed lit up like a flare under her gaze. Daniel hovered nearby, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls. He watched her work, arms folded, a mixture of skepticism and awe etched into his face. "You're faster than the entire legal team upstairs," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Elena didn't look up. "They're reading for profit. I'm reading for survival." Her tone was steady, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Not from uncertainty, no. She knew she was right, but from the enormity of what she was doing. Each correction she made pulled her further out of the shadows, further from the safety of being invisible. She circled a phrase, underlined it twice. This is the pivot point. Section 22. If they think you're dodging penalties with vague language, the whole deal collapses. Clarify it, own the risk, and you win their trust back. Daniel leaned in, scanning the paper. His eyes widened slightly. "That's exactly what they flagged on the last call. How did you—" Her pen stilled. Slowly, she looked up at him. "Because I've written deals like this. Bigger ones. Messier ones. Ones that couldn't afford to fail. For a heartbeat, the truth hung between them, naked and undeniable." Daniel inhaled, as though weighing whether to push further, but the intensity in her gaze stopped him. The assistant returned, breathless, holding out a tablet. "They're still online, but furious." Hale's stalling, his eyes flicked nervously to Elena, as if unsure why she was even in the conversation. Daniel took the tablet and glanced at Elena. "Will you come with me?" Her stomach tightened. This was the line again. The moment where hiding would no longer be possible. She thought of Sophia's message. The inhaler tucked into her bag. She thought of Victoria's whispered threat. "You'll regret this." And then she thought of her daughter's voice, asking when people would stop looking through them. Elena rose slowly, folding the papers neatly, slipping the pen into her pocket. "Yes," she said, her voice calm but unshakable. The assistant gawked. "But she's not—" "She's coming," Daniel cut in, his tone sharp enough to silence protest. Together, they walked back toward the boardroom. Every step echoed like a drumbeat in Elena's chest. The mop bucket she'd left behind felt miles away now. Its disguise no longer enough. She wasn't just a janitor walking into the fire. She was a negotiator returning to the battlefield she had once ruled. The doors opened to chaos. Executives shouted over one another, their polished composure shattered. Victoria Hale stood at the head of the table, her face flushed, her voice fraying as she snapped orders no one could follow. The investors' faces glowed cold and unimpressed on the screens, a single movement away from cutting the call for good. All eyes turned when Elena stepped in. The room fell into a stunned hush, disbelief rippling like a current. Victoria's gaze sharpened, her lips curling in open contempt. "You again!" she spat. "I told you to stay in your place." Elena held her ground. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Your place is crumbling, and I'm the only one who can stop it." A murmur rose around the table. Executives exchanged nervous glances. The investors leaned closer to their cameras, curious. Daniel cleared his throat. "She's identified the exact issues. If we implement her corrections now, we can salvage this." Victoria's laugh was sharp, brittle. "This is insanity." A janitor rewriting billion-dollar contracts? Elena didn't flinch. She set the papers on the table, sliding them toward the center. "Not rewriting, correcting. And if you don't, the investors will walk. They already know you're trying to cut corners. What they need now is proof you're willing to be honest." The lead investor spoke, his voice clipped. "She is right. Again. Why are you resisting the only person making sense?" Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's smile faltered. Her nails dug into the wood of the table as she leaned forward. "You think you're clever," she hissed, "but you're nothing. And when this deal is done, I'll make sure you're finished." Elena met her eyes, calm and unwavering. "I've already been finished once." It didn't last. The words landed heavy, pulling the silence tighter than ever. Elena felt the old strength filling her veins. Not pride, not arrogance, but clarity. She wasn't invisible anymore, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. "Subscribe now." The story itself whispered through the tension, because what happens next changes everything. The silence in the boardroom stretched so long that even the hum of the projector seemed loud. Elena stood at the edge of the table, her papers spread like evidence, her calm gaze locked on Victoria Hale. She hadn't meant to say so much, but the truth had slipped free. She wasn't just a janitor. She had been someone else once, someone powerful. The lead investor broke the stillness first. "Address Section 22, he said firmly, his eyes on Elena rather than the CEO. "We will not continue without it." Victoria's nostrils flared. She forced a smile, her tone dripping with venomous sweetness. "Of course. Our team will address the oversight immediately." Her glare at Elena was a knife wrapped in silk. Elena placed her fingertips on the table, leaning slightly forward. "Not just the oversight. You need to clarify penalties and define deliverables in writing. Anything less, and they'll see it as another deception." Executives shifted uncomfortably. Several leaned toward their screens, typing furiously, as though scrambling to keep up. The investors nodded faintly, their skepticism softening. Daniel stepped forward, backing Elena up. "She's right. We can draft amendments now. If we stall, they'll shut the door permanently." Victoria's smile snapped. "You will not take instructions from her." The words cracked across the room like a whip. She looked at Elena, her voice dropping into a hiss. "I don't know what game you're playing, Torres, but you've overstepped." Elena straightened, steady despite the pounding in her chest. "This isn't a game. It's the difference between a deal saved and a deal lost." One of the younger executives, pale and sweating, spoke hesitantly. She's right, Ms. Hale. If we don't acknowledge the penalties clause, we'll look incompetent at best, dishonest at worst." His voice cracked but held. Victoria turned on him, eyes blazing. "You dare side with her?" The young man swallowed hard and looked down, but the damage was done. Others around the table were beginning to shift. their loyalties wobbling as cracks appeared in Victoria's control. The investors seized the moment. Time is short. Correct it now. We want clear terms, or we leave this call. Their leader's voice was unyielding, final. Daniel shot Elena a quick look, his jaw set. Show us exactly what needs to change. Her pulse surged. Every instinct screamed that this was her chance to disappear again, to step back into safety. But when she thought of Sophia, of her daughter's quiet question about being invisible, Elena knew she couldn't retreat. Not now. She slid the marked pages across the table, her pen tapping the key lines. Here, strike the vague wording in Section 22. Replace it with explicit deliverables tied to quarterly milestones. Add a clear penalty clause with capped liability. That will restore balance and trust. The executives huddled around her notes, their screens lighting up with edits. Murmurs of agreement rippled. Even the skeptical ones couldn't argue with her precision. Victoria's fury deepened with every second. You're undermining me in front of my board, my investors, my company, she spat. Elena didn't flinch. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. I'm saving your company in spite of you. Gasps shot around the room. For the first time, some executives smiled faintly, almost hidden behind their laptops. Daniel's lips twitched at the corners, but he kept his composure. On the screens, the investors nodded. Good. These changes are acceptable. We can proceed. If finalized immediately, relief swept through the boardroom like a gust of air. But it was fragile. Everyone knew the storm wasn't over. Victoria's face was stone, her power unraveling, but not gone. She stepped closer to Elena, lowering her voice to a poisonous whisper meant for her alone. You think this makes you untouchable? When this call ends, you're finished. I'll bury you so deep no one will remember your name. Elena met her gaze steadily. You already tried, she said softly, and I'm still standing. The words landed like a strike. Victoria's mask cracked for just an instant, revealing the raw rage beneath. Daniel cleared his throat, pulling the room back to order. Let's focus. The investors want confirmation. We deliver it now. Executives scrambled, typing, revising, sending documents flying across digital platforms. Elena stood back, her role momentarily complete, but her presence still commanding the air. The mop leaning in the corner seemed a distant relic now, absurd in contrast to the battlefield around her. The investors spoke one final time. We will stay on this call until the corrected version is signed. Their faces flickered with the faintest trace of satisfaction before turning stern again. The deal wasn't saved yet, but it was no longer dead, and everyone in the room knew why. Victoria clenched her fists at her sides, her fury barely contained. Elena could feel the heat of her hatred, but she didn't let it pierce her calm. Because now, for the first time, she wasn't invisible. The boardroom was a hive of motion. Papers shuffled, keyboards clattered, muted curses hissed under breaths. The investors on the screens sat like judges, their faces impassive, waiting for proof the corrections would hold. Daniel directed the chaos with calm precision, ensuring Elena's notes were translated into live edits. Every line she had marked was being rewritten in real time, and every executive knew whose hand had guided it. But Victoria Hale didn't move. She stood at the head of the table, her smile stretched thin, her nails drumming on polished wood. She watched Elena like a hawk circling prey, fury simmering beneath the veneer of control. Every keystroke that followed Elena's instructions was another blow to her authority. Elena remained near the wall, her posture straight, her expression calm. She didn't need to raise her voice or demand recognition. The proof was in motion on every screen. Still, Her heart raced, her palms damp. She had stepped too far out of the shadows to pretend she was invisible anymore. The lead investor leaned closer to his camera, voice sharp. "We need confirmation. State the corrections aloud." His gaze fell on Victoria, but the CEO hesitated, her lips parting, then closing again. Daniel glanced toward Elena, hesitation in his eyes, then spoke. "Torres, would you?" A hush fell. Executives froze. The word Torres echoed around the room like a revelation. No one addressed the janitor in meetings. Yet here was Daniel, placing the moment in her hands. Victoria's face hardened. "Absolutely not," she snapped. "She is not authorized to speak for this company." The lead investor's tone cooled. "Then perhaps you are not authorized to hold our investment." The boardroom went still. Elena inhaled slowly, her voice steady as she spoke. "The language has been corrected. Section 22 now ties deliverables to quarterly milestones with capped liability. Penalty clauses are clearly defined. The ambiguity is removed." The investors exchanged brief glances, then nodded. "Acceptable." Relief spread through the room like oxygen returning to lungs. Executives slumped back in their chairs, a few exhaling audible sighs. But the weight of the moment wasn't lost. Elena, the janitor, had just spoken the words that kept the deal alive. Victoria's smile returned, but it was brittle, sharp. She turned toward the screens, reclaiming the spotlight. "As you can see, our team has resolved the issues with speed and precision. We value your trust, and this correction proves our commitment." Her voice was honey over broken glass. Elena said nothing, letting the lie slide. She didn't need credit, not now. But the fire in her chest told her the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Daniel leaned closer, his words low enough for her alone. "You just salvaged a deal worth more than the company's yearly payroll. And they all know it." Elena's throat tightened, but she kept her gaze forward. "That's exactly why I can't let them know who I am." The investors spoke once more, final and firm. "We accept the corrected draft. Send the signed version within the hour, or the agreement is void." The screens flickered, then went dark, leaving only the stunned faces of those in the room. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the executives erupted in motion again, scrambling to finalize the paperwork. Victoria remained motionless. Slowly, she turned her eyes to Elena, her smile gone. "You think this makes you a hero?" she asked, voice icy. "You're nothing but a ghost haunting this building. And when I decide to sweep you out, no one will stop me." Elena met her glare, calm but unyielding. "Maybe I'm a ghost," she said softly. "But tonight, the ghost saved your empire." The words settled heavy in the air, cutting deeper than anger. A few executives exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty shifting ever so slightly. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "We should finalize the draft immediately." His tone carried authority, redirecting attention back to the task. But Elena noticed the faintest flicker of a smile at the corner of his lips, a silent acknowledgement of her stand. She stepped back, her hands folding in front of her, as if reclaiming her disguise. But inside, she knew the disguise was slipping. The janitor mask no longer fit. The room had seen through it, if only for a moment. Her chest rose with a steady breath. She thought of Sophia, waiting at home, unaware of the storm her mother had walked into. She thought of the question that had haunted her all day. When will people stop looking through us? The answer wasn't clear yet, but Elena knew one thing. Victoria Hale had chosen the wrong woman to threaten. Elena stood silently as the boardroom settled into a fragile rhythm again. Executives busied themselves with paperwork, their eyes deliberately avoiding hers. No one dared thank her, but no one dismissed her either. That was a shift in itself, and Elena felt it. For the first time since stepping into the building months ago, she wasn't invisible. Victoria Hale, however, hadn't moved. She remained at the head of the table, perfectly still, her smile gone. The CEO's eyes never left Elena, sharp as blades, calculating. It wasn't victory that glimmered there. It was vengeance, the kind that outlasted contracts and signatures. Elena knew she'd made a powerful enemy. Daniel broke the silence first. The corrected draft is being circulated. All that's left is final review and signatures. His tone was calm, but Elena noticed the subtle shift. He was standing taller, his authority growing in the vacuum left by Victoria's faltering control. One of the younger executives cleared his throat. "If I may," he said nervously, "I think it's appropriate to acknowledge that without Miss Torres, the deal wouldn't still be on the table." His voice cracked on the last words, but the point landed. Gasps rippled quietly around the room. Heads turned. Victoria's lips twitched into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Acknowledgement?" she repeated softly, dangerously. "Are you suggesting that this company's reputation rests on the word of janitorial staff?" The young executive flushed and sank back into his chair, silence swallowing the room again. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't lash out. Not yet. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the investor's words still echoing in memory. She is right. Again. That had been the real acknowledgement, the one Victoria couldn't erase. The heavy boardroom doors suddenly opened, and more staff slipped in. Assistants, clerks, junior managers, all drawn by the whispers of chaos. The hallway beyond buzzed with employees, curious about the commotion. Elena realized with a jolt that this confrontation was no longer private. Whatever happened next would ripple far beyond this room. Victoria must have realized it too. She straightened, smoothing her blazer, and raised her voice for the audience beyond the walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, tone suddenly performative. "Tonight we secured an investment that will ensure our company's dominance for decades. And we did it with leadership, decisiveness, and teamwork." Murmurs of agreement followed from a few loyal executives. But others glanced toward Elena, hesitant, as though weighing whether to remain silent or speak truth. Daniel stepped forward. "With respect," he said evenly, "it wasn't decisiveness or teamwork that salvaged this. It was clarity, and that clarity came from her." He gestured toward Elena. The room stilled. Elena's chest tightened. This wasn't what she wanted. Not exposure, not recognition. But the truth was out now, undeniable. Victoria's smile faltered. "Clarity from a janitor?" she asked, her tone dripping disbelief. "What do you think this says about our company? That we require cleaning staff to correct multi-billion-dollar deals?" Her words struck like a slap, designed to humiliate, to shrink Elena back into silence. But something inside Elena hardened. She thought of Sophia, of the question she carried like a wound. "When will people stop looking through us?" Elena stepped forward, her voice steady, rising above the murmurs. "It says that worth isn't defined by job titles or paychecks. It says that intelligence doesn't vanish when someone picks up a mop. And it says that a company built on arrogance will collapse without honesty." The words rang through the room, carried down the hall where employees had gathered. A ripple of agreement spread, quiet at first, then stronger. Some nodded, some whispered, but all listened. Victoria's face reddened, fury trembling at the edges of her control. "You dare lecture me in my own boardroom?" she hissed. Elena didn't flinch. "You dare dismiss me in front of your own investors? The difference is, I was right." Gasps broke again. Even the most loyal executives shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's eyes held hers, steady, supportive, but he didn't interfere. This was Elena's moment, and he knew it. The tension snapped when one of the employees in the hallway clapped. Just once, awkward, hesitant, but it was enough. More hands joined, soft at first, then louder, until applause filled the air. Victoria's composure shattered. "Enough!" she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. The sound cracked like thunder, silencing the room. She glared at Elena, voice shaking with rage. "You will regret humiliating me tonight." I promise you that Elena met her gaze with calm defiance. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but my daughter will know her." Mother stood tall, and that's something you can't take away. The room was silent again, but not with fear, this time with respect. Elena felt it in the way eyes lingered on her, not as invisible staff, but as someone who had shifted the ground beneath their feet. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. Elena stood in the charged silence, her words still echoing through the boardroom. The applause that had flared moments ago now hung like an aftertaste of defiance, and she could feel the shift in the air. No one looked at her as just the janitor anymore. Whether they admitted it out loud or not, the truth was too clear. She had saved them. Victoria Hale, however, wasn't finished. She straightened at the head of the table, the flicker of panic in her eyes quickly buried beneath a mask of icy poise. "This company does not run on speeches," she said coldly. "It runs on leadership. And leadership is mine." The words rang hollow. Executives avoided her gaze, shuffling papers as if they were suddenly very busy. Daniel remained still, his hands clasped in front of him, watching carefully. Elena could have stayed silent, but something deeper compelled her forward. She stepped closer to the table, her voice even but carrying weight. "Leadership isn't about power. It's about responsibility. Tonight, you nearly lost everything because arrogance blinded you. If your pride mattered more than the people counting on you, then you've already failed as a leader." A murmur swept the room. Some executives shifted in agreement. Others simply sat frozen, unwilling to side against Victoria, but unable to deny the truth. Victoria's jaw clenched so tightly, Elena thought she might shatter her teeth. "Get out!" she spat. "Leave this room and never come back." Elena glanced at the mop still resting in the corner, its presence absurd in contrast to the battle being waged here. Slowly, she walked over and picked it up, her fingers tightening around the wooden handle. For a moment, she looked like what they wanted her to be again. Small, silent, disposable. But when she turned back, her gaze was steady, her voice calm. "I will," she said, "because I don't need to stay to prove what I am." You'll spend the rest of your career remembering that when everything was falling apart, the woman you dismissed held it together. Gasps rippled once more. Daniel's lips curved into the faintest hint of approval, though he masked it quickly. Victoria had no answer, only silence, sharp and suffocating. Elena walked toward the door, pushing the bucket with slow, steady movements. Each squeak of the wheels seemed to punctuate her departure. But just before she reached the threshold, she paused and looked back, her eyes sweeping over the room. "You asked what this says about your company," she said, her voice carrying into the hallway where staff still gathered. "It says the truth doesn't care about titles. It says honesty will always outlast ego. And it says the people you look down on are the ones you can't afford to ignore." The applause rose again, stronger this time, not just from the hall, but from within the room. It wasn't raucous, but steady, undeniable. A sound Victoria Hale couldn't silence. Elena stepped into the hallway, letting the door close behind her. The noise dimmed, but the fire in her chest didn't. She leaned against the cool wall for a moment, closing her eyes, exhaling all the tension she had carried. For years, she had hidden in shadows, surviving by staying invisible. Tonight, she had shattered that invisibility. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia lit up the cracked screen. "Good night, Mom. Love you." Elena smiled faintly, a single tear slipping free. For her daughter, this mattered more than anything. Not the applause, not the grudging respect, not even the fury of Victoria Hale. What mattered was that Sophia would grow up knowing her mother hadn't stayed silent. Daniel appeared at her side, quiet. "You realize you just changed everything?" he said. Elena didn't look at him, just stared at the mop in her hand. "Maybe," she murmured. "But some things needed changing." He nodded once, as if understanding the weight of her words, then left her in peace. Elena pushed the bucket forward, her footsteps steady, her shoulders no longer bent. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't just carrying the weight of survival. She was carrying dignity again. And no threat, no arrogance, no CEO could take that from her. Now it's your turn. What should the next story title be? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?